Formule 1 at Parc Saint Paul in France was one of the most bizarre roller coasters ever built. Built by PAX, this coaster embodies that company perfectly because of the wonky transitions and abrupt maneuvers. The best way to describe this coaster is the love child of a wild mouse and an RMC. However, this coaster will never operate again, at Parc Saint Paul at least. In this video, I will provide my review of Formule 1 and provide a history of this enigmatic coaster. PAX is a Russian manufacturer notorious for building small coasters with powerful airtime and awkward-looking transitions. But they defy all logic and actually ride quite smoothly. None of their coasters ever made it to America, which gives their rides an urban legend vibe stateside. Parc Saint Paul has never been afraid to install odd roller coasters. In 2000, the park added their first PAX coaster in Wild Train. This coaster is like an outdoor Skull Mountain as it has a steep, airtime-filled first drop that doesn't belong on a family ride. From 2003 to 2005, the park operated Looping, the world's only powered looping coaster. The loop itself was gravity-driven, but everything else around it was powered. This Soquet creation now tours the French Fair circuit. And I'd be remiss not to mention Les Telefériques, the bizarre, gravity-driven playground contraption that some consider a coaster. But arguably their craziest roller coaster opened in 2005 in Formule 1. Also built by PAX, Parc Saint Paul acquired this coaster for just 800,000 euros, which seemed like a bargain at the time, but the coaster would be plagued by issues. In its first season, the ride had braking issues. Multiple cars collided into each other and caused injuries to 12 riders. The park paid Soquet to come in and fix the brakes. The original brakes appear to be spring-loaded from the photos I could find. But a more unfortunate incident occurred in 2009. A 35-year-old woman was ejected from the coaster and unfortunately killed. Reports state that size played a factor. To prevent an accident like this from occurring again, Formula 1 had seatbelts added as a redundant safety measure. And then the ride ran accident-free for the next decade. However, the park manager, Gilles Champion, decided to remove the seatbelts after the 2019 season. He was quoted as saying that seatbelts did not constitute a real element of safety. At the same time, the manager ordered to have the first notch of the lap bar mechanism removed to prevent the ride from ejecting a heavyset rider by not allowing them on in the first place. These changes occurred after the ride's prior safety inspection and were not disclosed to external bodies. And less than 1 month after opening for the 2020 season, a repeat of the 2009 accident occurred. Yet another rider was ejected, and size again played a role. The park manager was charged with manslaughter for tampering with the coaster's restraints. My thoughts and prayers go out to the families of the victims. It's really scary an unauthorized restraint modification like this would take place without approval by a manufacturer or an external safety body. But it's especially true when it's on a ride with the type of airtime that Formula 1 has, or a ride that had a prior accident. When I rode Formula 1, it was early in the 2019 season when the seatbelts were still in use. These were accompanied by a lap bar. And these may be the only rides I will ever get in Formula 1, as the park decided to remove the coaster after the second accident. On the day I visited, Formula 1 was a walk-on. But even if the park was busy, I doubt it would have had a line since it was sporting 8 cars. In terms of looks, Formula 1 was a portable coaster, but it had a fresh blue paint scheme and the ride had a light racing theme. Each car had decals of car manufacturers or racing sponsors, and the ride had some other racing paraphernalia nearby. One other odd feature about the cars in this ride is that they were elevated quite a bit above the track. On most Wild Mouse coasters and coasters of comparable size, you have to step down into the train. On Formula 1, you had to climb up into the train. So because of your position higher above the track, this accentuated all the maneuvers in the ride, including the drops and the turns. Once dispatched, you began your climb up the 49-foot or 15-meter tall lift hill. And this may have been the steepest non-vertical lift hill in the world. Your car traveled atop the hill at the snail's pace, but it gave you a great view of the insanity that is to follow. The first drop was uneventful. It was just a small dip that felt sorta like a pre-drop. The second drop is a sharp swooping drop to the right, and you get a good pop of airtime on the strop. But that was just the warm-up for the third drop. The third drop was unbelievable. It took my breath away. It would even take Alan Schilke's breath away. This drop gave similar airtime to the Rolling Thunder hill on El Toro. This was some insanely powerful and sustained ejector airtime. And if you looked at the profiling on this drop, it was not hard to see why. The drop was a decent bit shorter than the lift hill, so you already had a good head of speed cresting this hill. And the crest was ridiculously tight, so you were absolutely thrown over this drop. Not only that, the drop was extremely steep as well. No angle of descent was listed, but this was probably approaching 60 to 65 degrees, which is unheard of for a drop that's probably no taller than 40 feet or 13 meters. And you also have an incredible head chopper in this drop, which is extremely effective because you're being ejected upwards right towards it. That drop alone made Formula 1 memorable, but it wasn't a one-trick pony. The pullout pulled some solid positive Gs from how sharp it was, and then the coaster immediately followed up with one of the oddest double ups ever created. Most double ups are spread out and the coaster itself is allowed to level off in between hills. But on Formula 1, the coaster doesn't level off. Instead, you sharply rise upwards and then the track sorta lurches forwards a bit before continuing upwards at an equally steep angle. The result is an extremely powerful pop of ejector airtime on the first part of the double up, since the transition is so abrupt and it occurs when you're so close to the ground. And you also have a wicked head chopper with the track above, and it really feels like you'll hit it because of how strong the airtime is. Right after you return to your seat, you are popped up out of your seat again as the train crests the top of the double up. The second pop is considerably tamer than the first one, since you don't have as much speed cresting this hill, but the profiling is so tight that it still will cause that tiny pop of airtime. Formula 1 then entered the Wild Mouse section of the ride. But remember, this was a PAX coaster, meaning they refused to do anything normally. So rather than having the traditional unbanked hairpin turns you find in most Wild Mice, Formula 1 had outward banked hairpin turns. Alan Schilke may have popularized the outward banked turn on the SNSL loco coasters and the RMCs he designed, but Formula 1 did the outward banked turn first. You took these turns with very little speed, so you got some weird lateral hang time. This section of the ride starts slow, so if speed and pacing are synonymous for you, you may consider this coaster to have poor pacing. But for me, pacing is how quickly a coaster throws a great element at me, and these turns are so laughably awkward that I had a smile on my face. However, the entire hairpin turn section is angled downwards, so each turn is taken a bit faster. So eventually, the lateral hang time morphs into more conventional laterals. After about a half dozen of these turns, you violently dip towards the ground. This was another shockingly steep drop, and it delivered another abrupt pop of ejector airtime. Then you cruise over a comically compact bunny hill with an even tighter crest than all the other hills in the ride. So as you'd expect, you get absolutely launched out of your seat and are treated to some strong and sustained ejector airtime. This is another very underrated airtime moment that no one talks about. You then sharply rise up into a brake run, getting a quick pop of airtime. You're slowed down a considerable amount here, and then you bank towards the ground and slowly twist your way to the brake run. The finale in this coaster is a buzzkill compared to the intensity that preceded it, but everything else more than made up for it. So what would I rate Formula 1? Believe it or not, I would rate this coaster an 8.5 out of 10. This was among the most underrated roller coasters in the world in my opinion. I consider this a Wild Mouse style coaster, and it was easily the best of the genre. It's no contest. None of the other Wild Mice offer airtime like this. Heck, Formula 1 had ejector airtime rivaling and sometimes exceeding the RMCs and Intamins you often see atop roller coaster poles. That's how powerful this ride was. And it wasn't just one airtime moment either. There are a half dozen of these moments. Mix in some bizarre laterals in the hairpin turn section, and you have a coaster I won't soon forget. If this coaster were at a more frequented park, it would have received a lot more attention over the years. The best comparison I have for Formula 1 is another coaster that's now defunct in the Scandia Screamer. Both rides look wrong and offer some shockingly strong and abrupt airtime. It's a shame Formula 1 is no longer operating, but I understand why Parc Saint Paul could no longer operate this coaster after it ejected riders twice. I'm optimistic another park could save this coaster since it has proven it can run accident-free with the seatbelts, but we'll see what happens. So those are my thoughts on Formula 1, a coaster that was really messed up, but in the best way possible. What are your thoughts on this coaster? Did you ride it? Or have you been on any of the other PAX creations? I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate if you gave this video a like, and you considered subscribing since there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.